Hello, my name is Ben Keat, and I'm making a short video about the researches I've put in place to implement the survival mode for the strategy of those undertaking regression to self-sacrificial point. It is essential that the people who go through this process understand that there is now a full network of transhumanism in process to make sure these people are able to be kept alive in a reality that is their own. I do not want people thinking that they're going to self-sacrifice themselves to physical death point. Um, this undertaking must be undertaken with the knowledge that you're not necessarily um, going to even suffer in the self-sacrificial point, but the acceptance of it is a change of life. It's a change, it's a way of adapting to a new way of thinking. That's the most important thing. Um, and it's acceptance of doing it for other people. It's not just doing it because it seems like a good thing to do and there's no other options. It's the realization that something has gone wrong. Um, Probably not your fault personally. You may believe other people to be at fault, but when it's offered to you, you should take it because it's an award to start off with. It's not something you should do reluctantly or nervously. If it feels like something you're destined to do, then please do it. If you don't feel safe or comfortable in the taking of it, then please don't, because it won't. This is your initial gut feeling. You should be aware that you may not come through it properly if you have those nerves. You always have the choice to turn it down, to not accept it. And it's important we get the right people on the program, people who are brave enough at heart to do it. You have to have heart, you have to be confident um, among your own gender, your own sex, at least to start off with, irrespective of the fact that you may wish to reverse that and to become more in tune with the opposite sex, as is natural for most people who go through it at the stage that I went through it, which is about the age of 21, 22, when you start to realize you're going to have to form a long term relationship at some point with someone of the opposite sex or have children, irrespective of whether you did or not actually achieve that. That is an underlying goal of the whole thing, to bring it back to righting a few wrongs of, in males' cases, misogyny, and you get a lot of reverse misogyny with women, or misogyny from women to men, which nowadays, which is still possible. Uh, Women and men can be equally feral, let's put it that way, to potential victims, either sometimes of their own sex, but usually that's the reason why the whole process has to be undertaken, because someone in your group has, dropped out for one reason or another, and it's not a good one. It's not a self-sacrificial one necessarily. It's probably more because they couldn't take the pressure that was being exerted upon them by their group. Um, it, if it's someone of the opposite sex who you've been a little bit misogynistic with, or that sort of thing, that's how the process starts. So you've got to learn, um, as you develop, as you go through the developmental phase or return phase, you've got to learn how to treat the opposite sex and how to get on with your life partner ultimately. That one day you may or may not have your heart set on marrying, but that's probably the goal that most people aspire to, and the duty of care shifts to that side of your life, to nurturing a child, to bringing a child into the world, and to sustaining that life, as part of your commitment to continuing the future of his or her reality. So, what I'm advocating here is, when you get involved in a self sacrificial process, you have to be sure that you're going to come through relatively unscathed. However, you are going to be aware that you're going to be changed. If you're from a relatively wealthy background, who is privileged, has friends, is popular, you've got to be prepared to be an outcast and to possibly lose some of your wealth and some of the high esteem that other people held you in before you undertook the process. That's part of the process. That's just because you have damaged. It's karma, um, and it's making sure that it's inbuilt in you that you never return that someone. And the whole process of coming through that is the whole process saying, you've learned that, and it's making sure that you've learned that you should never, treat another human or uh, person, or and even people who mistreat animals. Everyone gets a certain level of karma dished upon them, and it's often the people who did the least who get the heaviest weight of karma upon them. But it's because they were always there and thereabouts, laughing at the jokes when they're never really the instigator of it and that sort of thing. To many people, that's often the one that's the most reviled because um, you know they're all playing to the audience of that person. However, you probably, when you're offered the choice of taking the self-sacrifice, you'll probably take it because you know you have a duty of care to the group you're with, and you realise that irrespective, even if you weren't involved in that group, um, at some level, um, they were going to come a cropper collectively, and that therefore would be a fruitless period in your life where you would not have achieved anything in socially, because what your social network or your social group of people around you who you're closest to, what they would have achieved is absolutely nothing, because they'd have ended up a disbanded group with no movement and no attachment, in terms of geographical attachment or anything else, connected to the whole zeitgeist that you were part of or you were at the time. Or you'd never you'd never you'd never be able to revisit those friendships and ensure that those people were looked after for the future. So, out of the goodness of your heart, you've got to have a good heart. This is what I say. You need a strong heart at the beginning before everything starts, because you've got to think. You've got to have this innate protective nature towards your closest people, your closest confidants, your closest friends, people. Even if you don't have confidence at that stage, you probably, as in confidence, you probably wouldn't have confidence, because you'd be the sort of person who's always doing things and getting on, making the jokes, or laughing at the jokes, or wanting to have fun, that sort of thing. This whole process is about becoming more serious and developing yourself into an adult, but it's not going through the usual historical ways of doing it. It's venturing into a much more positive outcome for the future. And this is why, when the undertaking is taken, it should be done, relatively positively, and with energy, thinking, yeah, I think that's a good thing to do, because ultimately the goal is a better one at the end of it. And ultimately, you may go through a 20-year-ish program, and at the end of it, you know that you're going to come out with something better and more hopeful for the future. So that's the bare bones of it. I won't go on too much longer, but what you have to learn is that as you go through the whole process of return and development stage through, you are being trained to bestow good karma, good positive vibes. Um, you will be caused to fight your own corner. You'll be caused to disown certain friends you've made in the past who you realise were probably a negative influence, not true friends. But however, even if that is the case, you will try the nature of the process. I won't spoil it too much for what happens when you get back there, but the whole process is you start to understand the rhythm of life. You start to understand how people became um, important to the future of the universe from this planet, and how our reactions on Earth affect the divine nature and how the divine um, affects us and becomes part of us. And this whole process is a wonderful journey of self discovery if you can only see the hardship first of all. There's nothing really to look forward to, and there's no point getting elated about being asked to take self-sacrifice. It may possibly, for some people, widen the scope and the horizon to begin with. However, it's much harder to undertake it properly if you don't realize, you will be vulnerable at the beginning, and you will have assets stripped, you will have esteem lost, you will be disbanded from your original friends. You will start to make a way for yourself. And it's up to you what you're going to make of that. If you're going to just wing it and say, well, we've got a bit of divine in us, we're amazing people, you probably don't have any divine. I'm not saying everyone's going to have the divine in them. Some people do, some people don't. Some people are in tune with the divine, with the universe. That's a good way to be cosmically aligned. We're all cosmically aligned. We're all directed by the stars, but we don't all have the same source of energy. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not going to be the same experience for everyone. And neither should you meter yourself to someone else and say, well, for this person it did this, so I'm expecting. You shouldn't be expecting. The best word for it, an intuitive word, which means a lot more, is to be aware, okay, to be aware of what's around you, very aware of your surroundings, sensitive to how things feel, whether they're positive or negative, how you start to wake yourself up, how you start to realize, what a positive feeling is, whether you're doing the right thing, whether you're being pulled in the wrong direction by a sort of unrelated entity that's doing sort of bad things behind your back, but you still go along with it. And these are your danger zones, and this is what's going to get you, because you can see how that can pull you into a very awkward situation when you're almost blank slated. So you've got to be aware of the vulnerable and the potential risks. But however, to overprotect yourself or to over endanger yourself at that self-sacrificial point is risky either way. One, for a negative factor, and two, for the factor that the last thing we'd want is someone ended up as a corpse on a cold slab because they'd gone out risking everything everywhere. Uh, it's a great, I mean, fine, some people will be like that in the world, but in my locality, I wouldn't expect people to go that far um, unless they feel ready for it, unless that's naturally their thing. I don't want people to be unnaturally expectant. The best thing to be really is to be awake to what's going on around you and aware, but not overly um, to have too many preconceptions about what's going to happen, because that's a dangerous way of doing things and leads to presumptuousness and all the other negative aspects of sort of hoping um, to do something negative to get the positive result. You should be aware that you're going to a risk, but accepting it for a good reason and understanding that probably it will have a good outcome, but you don't know what. Um, and it's irrelevant. Like I said, every experience is different. Everyone has a different experience. Everyone has a different source. Even parents of children have a different source. They go back to a different level, or they don't go back as far. Some children go back further. The whole thing is speculative. There's a whole plan there written, by people taking endeavors into the mind source where the ultimate goal is to be at the top, but you're not always going to be there. You're not always going to be at the top. You shouldn't expect that you're going to escalate either. Some people go back and they stay low because that feels more comfortable for them, or they just don't have the wherewithal to fight and get up and get off to the top because for one reason or the other. And again, presumption is a big risk because it can, you can hope for things but never progress. You're always on Groundhog Day, and in the latter stage, you start to experience this much more, and you just find the work is more important, and getting down and doing the work and doing the programming and all that sort of thing. you don't know that you're going to get up the next day and something's going to rapidly change and you're going to be held in high esteem, or you don't know that you're going to wake up the next day and things are going to take a plunge for the worse. And you're going to have to go through another process of because it's a spiral, it's a continuing journey, and to begin with, it's very acute. The highs and lows are very acute if you get up to that level in the first place, and then when you start to get to that level, you have to hope a lot more than is really deserve than really what you deserve when you're going through that process. So that's basically the risk factors are there, and I'm aware of them. What we're going to try and do is make sure that everything's disguised and encrypted around people, and what that will ultimately do is ensure probably as much protection as we can possibly give to prevent actual death. Uh, and you know, death could happen to anyone, whether they've taken self-sacrificial or not, self-sacrificial cause or not. But it's just you have to be aware of vulnerability and death being a nasty combination, because what would actually happen if you were vulnerable and died is you'd feel it more acutely, you'd have more emotions, you'd have more feelings. You may have paranoia at the time. You're gonna, the things you have to go through that aren't great, and even a near-death experience can be quite a life-changing experience. And if you don't learn something from it, if you just accept it and get on and carry on as normal, then that's a great way to be a good human being. Some people need a springboard to get back up, and sometimes that near-death experience can jolt them into a process of filling up their mind with knowledge. But other people do it a different way. They assimilate knowledge in the social network, and they don't break off and go try and springboard back again. But there are levels that determine your passive and your active nature, and as you develop your active nature, is the thing ultimately that should be um, taking charge of your life. As you get to the higher levels, the more active things you do, the more things you do to make a positive difference, uh, it changes your life. At the passive levels, in the back three levels, so you've got the front three levels and the back three levels. So the back three levels, you're definitely in the more passive phase, relying on assimilated knowledge or assumed knowledge or presumptions, possibly to a certain extent. When you get to the active levels, you're starting to put in place your idea. You're trying to shape the world around you, and that's something to go for. If you can be active at the beginning and stay active, without having to assimilate knowledge and learn from other people, that would be a good point to work on. But you may find you have recourse because of the bank slating that you have to actually get up and think positively first, which is, the more you are in your mind, the more your mind is working as a stimulus, needing stimulus, and trying to stimulate other people and trying to control the world around you. That's another thing you may find you start doing when you're in that situation. You'll want to be a sort of you might suddenly try and want to be a positive effect on everyone else. Well, that's going to be difficult. That's going to be difficult to do if you're active all the time. And some people do it through the body. I suppose they might do. I mean, some people actually have an active life, and their get up and go um, throughout their life before is just so keyed into them that when they get into that stage of vulnerability and suddenly becoming self-aware, it may manifest itself in a totally different way for certain people, and more power to them. I think that's probably the level up from my generation. That's probably how it'll be with the young people. They'll still be active. They'll still have this nervous energy. I don't know if you can totally lose all your nervous energy. Like I had a lot of nervous energy when I was younger, but I certainly, when I developed, I needed heaviness in a certain level because of, it was paranoia. It was things around me weren't great. I wasn't in great shape. I had some bad habits, and I needed to get some solidity into myself. I needed to strengthen myself from within. And some people, when you do that, you feel less nervous and you feel less, and you can relax and you feel more comfortable with yourself. And this is a good way of getting into the process of going back for some people. And some people are the exact opposite. They need to be more active going back. And as they come forwards, they start to get more relaxed as they start to feel themselves go forward. But I can't tell you how it's going to be for you. It's just the process and the steps will probably be the same and manifest themselves at different times and at different levels. So it'll be interesting to see how people graduate, how people seniorize as the process goes through. And those who undertake it, I recommend it, whatever the, the loss is going to be. Just rest assured, we will try our utmost to protect people. We can't guarantee absolute protection. There has to be that element of risk, because when you undertake self-sacrifice, you have to know that it is a heavier thing you're getting into. It's a deeper thing, and it's not always. There have to be some anomalies to make some horror stories, like with everything, to make people realize that actually, you know, sometimes if we don't risk things, we can't always get up and move towards the front to claim. We've been there too. We've suffered too. And people who aren't so maybe high up the pecking order to start off with, who get excited about the offers, I was like, they're the ones who are more at risk, I think, and should be wary of undertaking it. Actually, in fact, those people who are thinking like that now probably won't get chosen just because it's a risk we don't want to put people into. I'm making that clear. Remember, there has to be a plan written around you. You have to have a plan made to fit you first, and if you don't, then you are stuck in a state where your mind hasn't altered when you've gone through the process. And if your mind hasn't altered, then really, there's no point doing it, because there's no downgrade in your mind. You've got to, so there's no way you're going to assimilate or create your own knowledge from within, because you already know it all, and you're not going to be told anything different. So, you know, please be aware, only do it with a plan and when you've been chosen, because the plans are forming, it's there, it's around, and there are people there's a whole host of different opportunities, different possibilities for many different people, but it's not everyone. It is mainly only applicable to the universal mind. And I want people to be aware of that when they see this video, because we don't want too many people risking it when it's going to bring no goods to them in the end, and maybe only a downgrade in physical health. So, please be aware of that as well. Okay.